Hi, good afternoon from Los Angeles. I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, Clinical Director of the Center for Healthy Sex, and I'm here today to talk to you about Mirror of Intimacy, Daily Reflections on Emotional and Erotic Intelligence. Our topic for today is negativity, and it seems a perfect topic on this gorgeous spring day to remind us about where we put our attention. All right, so starting with our quote for today from Maria Louise von Franz, she writes, when we are able to see our own greed, jealousy, spite, hatred, and so on, then these can be turned to a positive account because in such destructive emotions is stored much life. And I think that's a really key phrase. In such destructive emotions is stored much life. And when we have this energy at our disposal, it can be turned to positive ends. So think about all the energy it takes to be negative, to be angry, to be greedy, jealous, spiteful, to hate someone. It's an enormous amount of energy that is being essentially turned against ourselves. And when we can use that, um, to the end of positive thinking or positive actions in our lives, then we can really have a more robust, full life. And all of the qualities that we treasure in life, like happiness, success, freedom, what we would call the positive qualities, beauty, love, they could never exist without polar opposites. So you can't have joy without sadness. Or you can't know them is more accurate. You can't like literally feel the difference about them in your own body unless you are knowing both ends of the spectrum. And to define a trait, we really have to differentiate it, just like we separate wheat from chaff, curds and wheys. You really have to be able to feel the distinction between the two. And it's not so much about eradicating them, but the only true antidote for grief, the only real experience of um, getting through grief is grief itself. That's the only portal for it. You can't circumvent it, you can't leapfrog it, you can't ignore it. You have to go right through it. And this is true with all of these, quote, negative emotions, that if you're really hating somebody right now, and there's nothing that feels as sort of pervertedly good as hating someone that we feel has wronged us or that we resent. And we can spend an awful lot of emotional energy and time and years really engaged with that person, even though they don't know it, by way of our hatred or our anger. And when you think about freeing up that energy, and it's visceral energy, you can feel the tightness in your chest or in your gut, or it can literally make us feel sick. The freeing of that allows us to move towards finding out what our potential is, where our wisdom is. So the courage to go into these deeply negative feelings and affective states is where the freedom from them lies. And, because India has been in the news so much today, I was thinking about this, and this is a line in the entry today in Mirror of Intimacy that, the lotus flower truly does emerge from the muck. It emerges from this mess. I would show you a photo because I had one on my desktop, but um, this incredibly, really exquisitely unique flower could not be what it is if it weren't mucking around in a pond of water that's got nothing but sort of mud and slime down below. So I think it's important, that's a beautiful image actually, to conjure, to think about these polarities. But despite the interdependence of good and bad, or how we habitually interpret negative traits as inferior to positive ones, we still want to cut them off. We want to bifurcate them. We want to separate them. And as long as we impose a hierarchical judgment on these qualities, we'll experience these same splits in our own life. So we'll be obsessed with rich versus poor, or men versus women, or this versus that, instead of just recognizing that these are polarities with equal and opposite values that all possess gifts for us in our lives. So someone writes, I'm often sad. I've lived 40 years with a depressed sex addicts. We're separated now, but I often think we confuse sadness and negativity. And I think that's true. I think when we are deeply sad, we can start to have negative thoughts about our sadness instead of embracing the sadness. Just like we can confuse sadness for depression, when really these are distinctly different states. And so honoring the sadness, but not making a story about it, is one of the challenges of an awakened life. To dive into the feeling of sadness, to notice that I just want to cry all the time, or I feel blue, or I'm unhappy with my circumstance, and to let yourself feel what that feels like in your body and to know it deeply, to let it bring you to your knees so you can see what's there. What is at the pit? What is at the bottom? What is the actual foundation of this sadness? And I think you will find if you go there yourself, Catherine, you will notice that there's a reclamation of yourself in that sadness and really culling the depths of it. And it becomes a portal and a window to our liberation. Maybe the sadness is that you've given up so much of your life living with someone who you saw many, many years ago was not really ever going to change, and that you yourself sold yourself down the river, that you did this to yourself. Now, of course, I don't know your situation at all, but oftentimes we look at our external circumstances and we think these are negative situations, but we've actually been a party to the creation of them. And just like we've created negativity, we can pull ourselves out of that and create a new narrative, have a new perspective, have a new and joyous life. Someone says, is using the terms negative or positive useful when describing emotions? Well, I think not. I think that is a little bit simplistic. It's also judgmental, and I think that's how we seem to value them. But these emotions have a valence to them. And I think that's where the value of negative and positive come into play. But the valence of joy states is an excitatory state in the body. They're actually high dopamine states in variations or 2 degrees. So we know joy, we know excitation, we know surprise. And that valence is a high valence. So we tend to label that positive. Whereas shame, pain, loss, sadness has a lower valence to it. In fact, there's sort of a collapsed state into the body. We can feel our bodies sort of curling over into a C shape instead of sitting up with our chest open and embodying the joy state. And these negatively valent states have us thinking as these emotions as negative. But truly, they are not either or, they're just state changes. And when we can make friends with our state changes, we become much more integrated internally. And we can cultivate self compassion from that place also by just noticing, oh, I'm sad, or I'm happy, or I'm neutral, without some accompanying story about it being good or bad, or positive or negative. Integrating our own, quote, negativities, keeping in mind that to acknowledge them is not the same as indulging them, is a key to this proposition. So there is the sort of saying in 12-step communities about having a pity party for oneself. And sometimes that feels really good, that I'm going to feel sorry for myself and I'm being a victim and I'm just going to kind of let myself sit here for an evening or something like that. But it's no place to stop or live, because there are accompanying stories to that. And when you get into a place of being a victim or living in victimhood, that is really getting stuck in the mire. And there's no place good to go from that. It's actually an unsafe place to sit, because your life will get sucked into that negativity. Someone writes, yeah, deception throws me into confusion. Um, and then you say your adult children says I'm negative, that I see what's wrong versus what's right. I want to change this. Well, good for you. Deception of others and our own, it's really our own self-deception. It's not the deception of others at some point. you say throws you into confusion, but confusion's not really a feeling. Confusion is a way to avoid feeling. It's a dissociative state that can be mild, moderate, or severe. But in any case, it's a way to not be in reality. If I go into confusion, I don't have to confront what's in front of me and what's really true. And living in this place of negativity is a way to really cultivate death and dying. And John O'Donohue says that death meets us in and through different guises in the areas of our life when we're vulnerable, frail, hurting, or negative. And one of the faces of death is negativity. So think of that. One of the faces of death is negativity because we're not living a full, wholehearted, robust life. We're busy mucking around in the muck, not seeing the lotus flower that we are. So be very careful about whether you're examining this life and seeing that the glass is half empty or half full. As I was driving here this morning, I thought about that saying that today is the first day of the rest of our lives. And what a powerful statement that is, because life changes in increments, in these imperceptible increments that we don't see until 4 or 5 years have gone on. And this came to me recently because a good friend of mine had her 75th birthday, and we celebrated a little outdoor celebration with 4 of us on Saturday night. And I was looking at photographs of her and myself, and it's like, wow, where did the time go? How did that happen? And you can see from 1 year to the next, 3 years, 4 years in photographs of yourself, what a dramatic shift that can be when you look at yourself. And so think that these changes are happening incrementally right here and right now. And any minute of the day that you squander by being a victim or telling yourself a story about how miserable your life is or how unsuccessful you are or how you didn't make it in this world is a way that you are looking into the face of death instead of really living your life in gratitude for what you do have and what is. Someone writes, I'm invited to stay out of judgment and invite curiosity when dealing with my emotions and feelings. And that is a beautiful invitation and a courageous one to say, I don't need to judge this. I'm just having that experience. It's like, if you saw a small child fall and skin their knee and start crying, would you judge that child or would you say, oh my, that just happened? And that child has the right to feel that hurt and those feelings and get up and dust itself off and go on about its business. And it's like that for us too, that if we can cultivate self-compassion for ourselves, then we don't have to devolve into these stories of negativity that chew up and eat up our lives. And let's see, someone writes, it's easy to get judgmental about carrying negative attitudes. Doubling down on negativity just magnifies the problem of facing negative states and embracing them. Any shortcuts you can suggest about carrying out this process would be welcome. Well, again, it's about noticing where these judgmental attitudes come from and how pervasive they are. And really, one of the most powerful eradicators of negative thoughts is meditation. When we start to cultivate a mindfulness practice, we start to notice everything around us, whether it's a sound or a dog barking or our own negative thoughts, or our thoughts about restlessness or we're not doing this right. And that process of mindfulness, of watching our thoughts, our breath, or a mantra meditation practice also has us starting to cultivate a certain part of our brain that actually literally gets thickened over time. It's like exercising a muscle. And so when we're in our waking space and we notice something negative, or we have a thought or a judgment about ourselves or someone else, we're able to notice it like, oh, there's that thought, or that's not very helpful to think that, or why am I beating myself up over this? It's just something that happened. It's just phenomenon occurring. And it doesn't even have a value of good or bad. If I broke that thing, it's like, oh, well, it's a glass. There's another one. Not a big offense in life. So being vigilant about where we put our attention is key to starting to slowly notice the ways in which we see the glass half empty instead of half full. The other thing I would highly recommend is making a daily gratitude list before you go to bed at night, at least 5 things you're grateful for every single day, no matter what. And then you'll start to see a perceptual change in the lens through which you're looking at life. Um, Someone's asking about explaining the relationship between developmental trauma and mild intensity seeking and difficulty with moderation. Those are actually very different things. I mean, developmental trauma implies trauma in the formative years of, say, 3 years through teenage years. And that trauma can have us becoming dissociated. All of us are mildly to moderately dissociated on any given day. So make no mistake about that. Our brains are quite automatic. We don't think about what we're doing, we just do it. And that is a function of the operational system that makes for efficiency. We don't have to think about every single thing we do. So mild to moderate dissociation is not usually a problem. Um, but impulsivity is different. When you have problems with moderation, you have a problem of impulsivity. And when impulsivity turns to compulsivity, that's when you get addiction. So that would also be helped with meditation, learning to practice and watch your impulse towards having that thing or buying that thing or doing that thing, and starting to just notice it. First of all, like, oh, I'm doing that. And then over time, beginning to intervene on it by saying, I'm actually going to wait and see, do I really want to eat that, or can I wait an hour? Do I really need to buy that thing, or can I wait till tomorrow? And if it's still nagging at me, or I've talked to somebody about it and I really, really need it, then I'll buy it. Otherwise, I'm just going to take a pass. And these are ways where we have to intervene on these mechanisms in ourselves. Let's see. Someone says, I need to confront negativity in my own life because it's being honest about the negative things I've done. How do I balance negativity with confronting things that are unpleasant and by association feel negative? How do I know when I'm being honest and when I'm needlessly expending energy on negativity? Well, if you've done something that has you out of your integrity, where you've cheated or lied about something or stole some money or done something like that, then it's appropriate to feel, quote, negative feelings, which would be something like shame or guilt or bad about yourself for having done that. And to acknowledge that I did that and I wish I hadn't, and so I'm going to apologize to the person or persons that I have offended against. And I'm going to suffer the consequences of that. I'm going to take the hit. And it may be that they're angry or they don't want to see me again, or I have to pay somebody back. But I'm going to really stand up and take the consequences for what I've done, because that's the only way to eradicate the shame of it. And then from there to practice the business of forgiving yourself for your humanity. You made a mistake, you did something wrong. And I think when we make a living amends, when we right our wrongs, that's where redemption comes into play. And so we redeem ourselves from the bad thing that we did, or the immoral, or the thing that we think is wrong. And then we don't have to feel bad about ourselves and keep clubbing ourselves, because the effect of that becomes this vicious cycle where the more we beat ourselves up, the more negative we become. And the more negative we become, the more we beat ourselves up. So the only way to get out of that, again, is to take responsibility for it and repair whatever we've done. Can you share best ways to shift from negativity into the full, wholehearted, robust life? Well, I think I have been talking about that. Taking responsibility, making gratitude lists, meditating. You have to be your own best, um, really judge, for lack of a better word, of how you're doing on that. And it's about, in the program, they talk about progress, not perfection. So you're not going to get it right off the bat. You're going to stumble and struggle with it. But if you keep doing it day in and day out, you'll start to habitually change these negative patterns and starting to see the world through a more beautiful lens, through beauty. This morning when I was parking my car, I saw this man walking down the street, and he was really struggling with his gait and with his arms. I couldn't tell if he had Parkinson's disease or he had some neurobiological problem that was impacting his ability to manage his appendage and to walk. I don't think he had cerebral palsy because he didn't have crutches and he was elderly. And I thought, wow, that man's lived an intense life. He's had many, many stressors in his life. And what a gift that he's giving himself by going for a walk and meeting this beautiful day. And a gift that he gave me for being deeply grateful for how my body functions today. Because I could complain about being old and having aches and pains and having a pain in my heel recently and all the things I can't do because of my heel pain, instead of just really taking that in with a full breath and saying, wow, I am so lucky. I'm so grateful that I'm able bodied. So he gave me a tremendous gift this morning, and those gifts are everywhere if we choose to look for them. I feel like much of my work with clients is about teaching them about dealing with difficult emotions and helping them embrace emotions as useful or difficulty pleasant and not just good or bad. You find yourself psychoeducating clients about this to an extent, but I'm much more of a fan of embodied awareness, of having people feel the difference between their negative feelings and their more positive feelings, and seeing what gets them where and what their preference is, and also what psychologically and physically stands in their way of these experiences. What if you're stuck in a state of fear of not being able to change that is relentlessly negative? How do you shift out of that? Well, that's a tricky thing because when we're in fear, our nervous system is typically on fire. And that's not a pleasant state to be. It's also a really unhealthy state to be because of the amount of cortisol production and other chemicals, neurochemicals that can start to really wear your nervous system down. So I would advise you to seek help, to seek therapy, to maybe find a therapist who does EMDR to help you move that fear out of your nervous system so you can kind of cool down your brain and your body so that you can start to see the life from a more realistic perspective of things. So negativity, as we're talking about it, and you can see, can become its own addiction. Our shadow side is always lingering. It's always there to drag us into a negative story or to have us having our attention more on one of the faces of death, as O'Donoghue tells us, as opposed to life. So it can keep us from living in the light. And like death, it can steal life from us as we fixate on misery instead of seeing the love and warmth and joy of the world and of our very own self. So these are polarities that we have to grapple with, and their tendencies also. If you were abused as a child, as this person asked this question about, early childhood trauma, and you just had a source of neglect for parenting where you didn't have a parent that was very joyful or positive or pointing you in the right direction, nurturing you and guiding you in life, then you're going to feel a collapsed state in the body. You're going to feel like you have, low muscle tone in your body. There's not a state of vitality, and that's not your doing or your fault. But at some point, we have to come to our own rescue. We have to be our own parent. And so that's about really doing a lot of inner child work and bringing that child into the present by way of your own nurturing. So it really takes strength and courage to be able to have two perspectives, to have this part of you that can see that, oh, I'm in trouble, I'm negative, I feel lost, I'm scared, and the part of you that is actually those things. And being able to make the smallest moves on any given day, whether it's seeking therapy or counseling or reading a book that points you in the direction of starting to have some insight, or learning a meditation practice that you devote yourself to, or exercising, which helps enormously with positive states in our bodies. So, whatever venue or avenue you take to pull yourself through this is really what's required so that we can start to get above that negativity and that collapse state and start to see the love and beauty and joy that's all around us every day. So someone writes, this is a fine line between might be called judgment and what might be called discernment, the one shading towards the negative, but the other one seemingly necessary to move forward. Can you speak to this distinction? Well, I have spoken about discernment before. And I think the distinction is that I'm making a discernment in the moment that I'm feeling negative or I see these negative thoughts, as opposed to just indulging them over and over and over again, where the only story running through my head is this negativity. So there is a recognition of the pain, the sorrow, the loss, the noticing of it, but not the incessant indulging of it, of always wanting to tell that story to people, of having nothing but miserable stories to tell people to the extent that people don't want to be around me anymore. Um, so there is a discernment there between the recognition and the action that we take. So I can see it, I can feel it, I can notice it, but what am I going to do about it? And as I said earlier, one of the most gracious things you can do is let yourself dive deeply into the feeling and get out of the story about poor me and how horrible things are. Instead, let yourself feel the depth of the despair, because that despair is an opening, it's a portal to being free from these painful feelings. So when we have a world of negativity, it usually manifests itself as self-destruction, and often in the form of negative self-talk. Sometimes it can be self-destruction in the form of physically injuring ourselves, but it is a slow form of dying. And this is different than painful feelings. I mean, sometimes when things are good, we tend to um, not realize it. We can be negative about things when they're just sort of boring or the same. And I think COVID really brought this into sharp relief, where I heard a radio show this morning about how, kids in school just suffered so much this year because it was so boring, and they don't have the capacity to see beyond that. They need their friends. Social life is such a huge part of learning in school. The interaction in the hallways, the time on the playground, having lunch together, talking about, which girl and which boy like each other, or girl and girl or boy and boy, whatever the story is. That's a vitality state for people to learn. But for those of us that were adults, the days just bled into one right after the other, and people made jokes about Groundhog Day. And in effect, there was something incredibly peaceful and quiet about noticing the simplicity of the days just melding into each other. And you can look back and think on days like that, wow, I didn't realize how good I had it. Whether it's COVID or not, when it's a simple little day, maybe like today, Monday, May 3rd, instead of seeing the profound beauty and the privilege of being alive and the gratitude for what you do have in this simplicity, we're likely to waste it or jettison it into, something that's not good enough. And therein lies the discernment. How are you going to see this day today? And are you going to register it as a precious moment in your life? Or is it just going to be another day that gets unnoticed? Let's see. What is the constructive way to deal with or learn from negative or obsessive thoughts that trigger my husband's sexual betrayal? What is the best mindset to handle bitterness towards my mother-in-law for her enmeshment and damages done to our marriage and intimacy? Well, I think you have to start to notice how much time and energy you put on that. And if that's a distraction from what you want and what you need and what's in your best interest, because often it's easier to stay in the loop of what was done to us or how screwed up the other person or persons are, or how awful they are, instead of saying, what am I doing with the rest of my life? How do I want this chapter to go? What pain do I want to pick? Is it the pain of living in this, perhaps, I don't know, dysfunctional system and living with these issues over and over again? Or is it the pain of leaving, of striking out on my own? Or maybe there's a third choice, which is a pain of my own self exploration and my own self awareness. That I'm going to get disinterested in what my husband's doing, my mother in law's doing, my adult children are doing. And I'm going to dive deeply into myself to find out who's there. Who am I today? I was hearing someone speak recently who was saying that we all know this, that we all live longer now than ever before. And that there's not just a first and second chapter to life, but there's a third chapter because people are living into their 90s. So imagine when you turn 60, you're in the third chapter of your life. So there's a whole like 3 different lifetimes that we get to live if we're lucky. The first part of it is just fraught with being a baby, leaving home, going to college, just growing up, and also all the fun that you can have in your 20s as well. So it's really a time of just starting to blossom and exploring, and everything is so new and exciting. And oftentimes from 30 to 60, it's a proposition of really hunkering down, of building a family and building a business and all the tribulations that go with raising children. And we can get knocked around quite a bit during those 3 decades. But when we emerge at 60, where do we go from here? Where do we go? What kind of life do we want to have? And so I would challenge you to step out of the story of what's going on in your household and start to ask yourself this question of who am I? What kind of life do I want? And maybe that will include your current configuration of family members, and maybe it won't. But you must be true to yourself. And I know this can sound incredibly selfish. And if you have small children, I don't take this question lightly at all because we're talking about families. Um, and sometimes a broken family is worse than an intact family, but an intact family that is terribly negative and filled with dysfunction and deceit and pain and yelling or any kind of addiction is not the better choice. So these are tough, tough decisions to make, and ones that shouldn't be made alone. They should be made in consultation with peers or therapists or trusted others. But the time is now to start to ask yourself, who am I? What do I want? And where am I going? And with that, we want to be balanced. The danger of only valuing positive thinking is that it can mask denial also, and it can really, as I said, it can really validate negative states, or it can mask pain and things that we're not looking at. I mean, there's nothing more annoying that somebody who's just perennially positive and they never have anything wrong in their life and nothing ever goes bad and there's no humanity there at all. We want to live a life that is full, and with that fullness comes the willingness to feel every color in the rainbow. We don't sit and look at rainbows and judge them, that we like the yellow but we don't like the green, and oh, that lavender is kind of off. We just sort of delight when we see them. We have an aha moment. We're excited. We call a friend. We take pictures. And so we should treat our own affective states similarly. So, are you strong enough to bear witness to your own negativity without being thrown off center? And that might mean that you're in a ball on the floor crying, and letting yourself just be, just letting it out, not judging it. Nobody cries for much more than 3 minutes. That's a long cry. You won't die from it. You'll actually feel a lot better afterwards. And when we fixate on these states and deny the reality and necessity of negativity, our negativity about negativity, which is an immature interpretation of it, it really destabilizes us. We lose our center. So this is an invitation to bring it all in, to all of it, to your happiness, your sadness, your joy, your pain, without apology. It's just what's happening at any given moment. There are perturbations in the system constantly. I mean, the fact is the human organism is never in a state of stasis. There's really no such thing. It's oscillating and changing and moving. There's blood coursing through us. We're hungry, we eat, we eliminate. Things are going on all the time. So acting like we're just all perfect and have it all together is sort of a bizarre form of denial. Let's see if there are other questions. What books would you suggest described about not having a nurturing parent? Well, it depends on what you are dealing with. Kelly McDaniel's new book, Mother Hunger, is about to be released in June for women who suffered with mothers that were less than nurturing. That's specifically for women. But any books that you read on attachment theory or parenting, even Dan Siegel's book, Parenting from the Inside Out, is all about looking at our own issues before we parent. This makes very clear what we did and didn't get when we were little. And our parents, we inherit their regulatory capacities. And if your mother is depressed when you're born or anxious, you're likely going to get a depressed or anxious nervous system. This is just a biological directive. It's not an opinion. It's how babies are encoded from early on. And these things get set up very early. This was one of my hypotheses early on, I think in 2007, when I started talking about maternal attachment and its relation to addiction. But make no mistake, people in developmental neuroscience have been writing about this for eons now. This is not new information. You'll find it being repurposed and repackaged in books. Many books. So go on Amazon and start noodling around and seeing what resonates for you. What's the distinction between feeling the pain of loss and sadness versus choosing the positive and gratitude by not avoiding it? Just that. You can feel sad and be grateful at the same time. You can feel sad or be in pain and read a book on positive affirmations at the same time. It's about being integrated and recognizing and inviting all of it, not saying, well, I'm sad, so I can't do this or that. It's both and. I did TM for several years, transcendental meditation, but I wonder if going into more of a trance state might be replicating dissociation and therefore might actually not be a good idea. Are you able to speak to this? Would a more embodied practice be better? So meditation, any mindfulness practice by definition is auto-regulatory and therefore dissociative. So you've got that on the head. So for people that struggle with serious dissociation, mindfulness is not the best choice. I think a sort of open-eyed meditation would be better, like taking walks on the beach or in the countryside, where you are really very mindful of being present. I think Thich Nhat Hanh wrote a book called Peace in Every Step. So this idea that you are noticing the sounds of your feet on the ground and you're seeing the birds and the sky and feeling the breeze on your skin, that is a very present mindfulness practice, but it's a walking meditation. So that may be much better for you. And certainly, psychotherapy that's body oriented is probably going to be better for you also. Can you turn things around for your child's future? If you have struggled with unresolved trauma through their infant and toddler years by doing your own work, or is it too late? I don't think it's ever too late. I think when you start to repair in real time, and when your children are old enough also to talk to them about how much you were struggling when they were infants, it helps them know why they struggle. So for example, if you have a 16 or 18 or 30-year-old that's anxious, and you're able to say, I was really anxious when you were born. I didn't know what I was doing. I was young. I was alone, or whatever was going on for you. And because of that, you inherited my anxiety. This is what we call an epigenetic transmission, because it's not genetic. It's just the way the genes are imposed upon and how they express. And so when you can start to make those kind of reparations with your children, and you can say to them, look, this is what has worked for me, that's really helpful. Because my brother and I were comparing notes recently about a condition that our father had, and I didn't know whether he knew that our father had this. But I was able to tell him what works for me, and it's likely going to work for him because we have the same chemistry, right? So if you are someone who takes, I don't know, any kind of medication, whether it's an antidepressant or a medication for your joints, which is what we were talking about, and you've had luck with it, then certainly share it with those people that are blood relatives because it can help them too. So, any way you can let your child know about your journey without it being TMI. You don't want to engage them in the gory details of what you've been through and how you got through it, but ways where you're sharing your wisdom, where you're sharing your guidance as a parent, I think is invaluable for your children. And much of our early program focuses on teaching us what's positive and negative, as we've been talking about in our character and our behavior, which gives us social standards that can create these lasting mental distortions because we get caught in the language, as you can see today with a lot of the questions about, is positive and negative really the right thing to be asking? So you want to consider that our feelings are innate and they're legitimate feeling states, whether it's sorrow, frustration, anger, as I said before, joy, pain, love, play, and all mammals have these affective states. Um, so they can be tainted when we judge them as negative, and they can block us from this ability to shine a light on them and really transform them. So be mindful about how you're labeling your feelings. You know, in a mindfulness meditation practice, it's just about noticing them. That's it. Not good, not bad, just noticing, because these are real bodily based emotional states that we don't want to deny. And so when they're denied, we don't let ourselves feel them. And then we start to fire off negative thoughts. And then we start to attack the self. And then we are face to face with death again. And so be very careful about how you talk to yourself and how you notice what's going on with you. Um, and we do the same thing with other people. When we judge the negativity of others, we're usually violating boundaries through unsolicited advice or abuse or emotional hostage taking. So it's better to see the world, even the negative parts of people, through another's eyes so we can help them. When somebody's angry at you, when they're raging about something and you're looking at them and thinking, this is ridiculous, like, what are they so upset about? Instead of taking it personally, if you can just dial it back and say, oh, wow, they're really struggling today. That person's hurting. Somebody really, they've got, let them have it, or they've got pressure on them. I don't know what's going on with them, but this is not about me. How can I hold them in a spirit of positive life, of compassion? Now that's not the same if somebody's really assaulting you and hurling insults at you, which case you get to say, I'm not going to listen to this, set a boundary and leave. But I'm just talking about in your day-to-day work or in your workplace. Um, so when we can see the situation more fully, then we can start to have empathy for other people. And that is a reflection of the self-compassion we have for ourselves. And empathy holds the key to the truth of negativity and really allows us to honestly experience ourselves and others. Let's see, what is an emotional hostage? My counselor says addicts don't have relationships, they take hostages. Well, that's a saying from Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, because oftentimes addicts aren't actually in relationship with the other person. They're busy using the other person to get their emotional needs met. So it's not what we would call a two-person system, it's a one-person system. Some people refer to this as being an emotional vampire. And you can always feel it. You can feel when you're being used by somebody as opposed to it being a two-way street. So remember that while it's healthy to experience, really experience in your body these painful, more negatively valenced affective states, It's unhealthy to just dump our troubles on someone else, or for us to waddle around or indulge in them over and over and over again until we have a poor me story. So be careful about examining your problems. Do it with someone that you trust. If you have to have a pity party, you're certainly entitled to it, but at some point you've got to get up and you've got to forge ahead and ask yourself, what actions do I have to take? How do I lick my own wounds? Where grief is concerned, grief has its absolute own timetable. If you've lost someone you've loved, whether it's a human being or a furry being, you have a right to cry and be sad and live in your sorrow until you're done with it. And the only way to find out if you're done is to let yourself feel the full depth and breadth of it. And then ask yourself, do you turn a blind eye to negativity in your experiences or personality? And think about one instance of negativity and simply sit with it as you would with a sick friend. And recall the sounds and smells and feelings and circumstances. And then see if you can unpack that incident to a greater understanding and illuminate your negativity by giving it your loving attention. See if you can feel today what you couldn't feel then, so you can release yourself from it and actually exercise self-compassion or forgiveness if that's what's called for. And see if you can make this day a beautiful day, a highly valenced, positive day, even if you're sad or upset. See if you can hold both of those polarities, to walk outside and say, oh my God, it's a beautiful spring day. What an amazing gift that I'm alive, that the air smells so good, that the flowers are so vibrant. And at the same time, notice I'm depressed or I'm really angry at my sibling or whatever's going on, that you can hold both of these at the same time so that you have a more full integrated life. So as always, if you have any questions or you're interested, you can find Mirror of Intimacy on Amazon.com. If you have questions about sex, love, addiction, relationship issues, sex and sexuality, you can call our intake line at 310-843-9902. So I hope you have a beautiful month. I hope you welcome spring in with a robust joyousness, and you let it see all of your colors. And until then, I look forward to seeing you in June. Thank you.